which should be fruitful as a foundational, place to get information from to build on top of for, the model that we want to present that kind of shows how we're going to move from where we are to a step in between here and where we want to be, which we will go in depth later on in later episodes, but want to be able to create massive socioeconomic change around the world and be able to encompass that and encapsulate that within a platform called Copiosis that would be able to measure action versus benefit to the planet as a whole, and then some. So that's just in a nutshell. But the basics are pretty important because there's a lot of cost structures that revolve around those basics today. And let's separate it into 5 categories right now. And then we'll add some pretty important things after we define these categories. So we could start off by, in this modern day socioeconomic existence, kind of separate out a few expenditures that happen either by government, business, or individuals that really go towards maintaining survival. These are necessities for survival and should be rights and not products and or schemes that involve product, government, co-op. I think when you break it down between what people need the most, water would probably be number one, and food, be able to sustain until, later on because of the requirements of our own vessel. But then we have clothing, being able to protect yourself from the elements when you're not in shelter, and or, to form your own actualization of yourself through part of your clothing. So, part of that would be through what you wear. And then we have shelter. Shelter's huge because, there's a lot of people that find themselves homeless, find themselves living in poverty, find themselves living with friends and family, and becoming dependent on those people. So shelter, and this should be a right, and there shouldn't be any effect on your own budget to have shelter. And then the last 2 are education and healthcare. So when we break it down and put those 5 as the core: food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and education, we start to realize how important these things are for not only baby duck moving forward, but for the people who don't have access because it isn't a right, because it is a product, or mostly all of it. Because if you look at it like as a public good, that's for education, for instance, that's an important way to look at it, because K through 12, it's like, you don't have to pay a tuition because it's a public school, not a private school. But it's built into property taxes and boosters, so they still are able to siphon the money off of the populace to be able to fund K through 12 and all of the associated activities in K through 12. The way I kind of want to break down the importance of these necessities is if the pressures of having to cover costs and or engaging with the government or business, have you not either not having access or not using access to these. So right now the system, so an edit forward on that would be, right now the system isn't really designed to provide access for everybody to the exact need with these different necessities, because it's a variety of offerings that come in from nonprofit business and government that fulfill these necessities that are important to the survival of humans moving forward. Going directly into copiosis from where we are now would be more difficult with the current state of this socioeconomics, including, prices and trade. You have to be able to kind of build this vision and kind of vision of promise and optimism that there are mechanisms at play that are trying to change the status quo.
They are changing the status quo, aren't they?
Very much so. The more that these technologies and new mechanisms of engaging with either producing, distributing, developing necessities, we're kind of going to see these iterations of, these open source platforms that are developing around these necessities that are now providing food, clothing, shelter, education, and healthcare for localities around the globe. And it's scaling to the need of some of these locations currently. Especially with food. When you teach a person how to farm rather than farm for them, then that food becomes a real thing for that individual or community. But we want to go much deeper in. So we not only want to cover processes, open source processes that can be copied and pasted around the globe to help provide for the necessities and localities, but also how developing tech within any industry can converge with this whole movement and accelerate the process towards zero marginal cost to produce the next unit of these necessities. Digitizing, redoing a lot of the fundamental understandings of exponential effects in economics. I think we're going to come to a conclusion that the necessities are going to be accessible to people at no cost through mechanisms of zero marginal cost, post-capitalistic, with more and more of these things. So kind of have a great an overlaying project that converges the technological piece, zero marginal cost piece with a spiritual piece, a socioeconomic piece, and then we'll see if there's anything we need to add. But then, and an abundance piece, because we are talking about abundance, and to be able to unlock abundance in, a game A type setting or a 3D or here on the physical plane is with abundant energy. So abundant electricity, heating and cooling, transportation. We can unlock zero marginal cost in so many different things with zero marginal cost energy. So zero marginal cost doesn't mean free, but technically it could mean it's the actual cost of it is so negligible that your budget wouldn't feel anything. But just imagine for a second, if we're talking about technology, we talk about like spirituality alongside it. So for instance, if we mention like a technology that can, like an avatar.
Right.
Have you seen the movie Avatar?
Yes.
We already have kind of like stand up, doesn't move humanoid robots that can broadcast, live via Zoom. So it's like someone sitting over here on this side of the world speaking to somebody, a crowd over there, and they see the robot, but you know that you're back home on the Zoom call. This kind of stuff does a few things. Like it creates a time abundance for one, because you don't have to go over there and you can still present to them. And then for two, it opens up this ability to create as many of these things as you need and then combine it with AI. So you wouldn't have to be presenting at everyone, but you could technically either be like transferring in a presentation that you're doing at another location, or have the AI run the presentation exactly as you did in the last presentation, and just multiply that by 100, but bring in all the feedback that comes in from that specific presentation for you to review later on. That kind of thing is like, okay, so now you really can be in more places at one time and amplify your influence that way. So this is just an example of time of life. But I kind of made that example so I could say that start to think of AI as something that's going to be converging with everything out there, and in an effort to create time abundance and minimize human error in certain things. But then, we can get to the nitty gritty of it if you want, like the creation of these codes, because there's definitely an argument. If you build bias into code, you're building bias into it, which technically is true. So we can open all of these up to counter arguments as well. I think that would be productive but in an effort to say, let's be aware of the peril and pessimism, but let's not focus on the promise and the optimism. Because we want to be radical optimists for baby, for TC, for me.
Yeah.
But a lot of this is gonna sound like completely, and I think we want to make the argument that energy is going to be the first, I should say, the next major platform to become abundant, because we've seen it already with a few platforms like communications, telephone, radio.
Yeah.
But we saw the telephone, it's a completely different pricing mechanism now, which mostly is the cost for the phone itself and not the service, because it's unlimited talk and text and all that infrastructure is built out. So we can really break down communications, because communications is one of the 4 pillars of decentralization. So we'll break down decentralization too. You need communication, decentralized finance, decentralized manufacturing, and decentralized governance. So if you can build those 4 things into each one of these necessities, then we take control and we meet our need to the need, while at no cost. So that's kind of the idea of setting these things up. They self-perpetuate after right now it would take an influx of philanthropy and or funding from one of the things that we're trying to make obsolete, government or business.
Right.
And I said that we're not trying to make anything obsolete. I think it would happen automatically because we'd stop using the other options. So they just service very, very elite, top of the triangle customers, where most everything else will have an open source version where you can just print it at home or print it in any kiosk, and, just kind of. So, and that's mostly with going to be with food and clothing. But it's like, how are you going to get abundant energy? Prices keep going up. So we might have to outline how we're going to get from where we are now to abundant superpower. And that I can do, because that's where a lot of my experience lies in policy. It's important to say, well, I can understand why you think that way, because that's the way our system has operated for the last 100 years. But then we can kind of say the past is not going to be a good indicator for the future of this instance, because, and then say this is how these laws could be rendered useless in the future. Because it's like, and it could come down to even definitions or vocabulary that's defined within the state laws. So I think at a certain point, all utilities and grid operators are going to be more resembling distributed systems operators rather than what they are now, independent system operators. So distributed systems is all of this solar, wind, and batteries, where the opposite is centralized generation that's then distributed out. So there's a lot of arguments right now that are proving solar, wind, and batteries are going to make it to superabundance of energy quicker than any other technology right now. Doesn't mean there won't be any kind of leapfrog breakthroughs, but I still don't think that's going to stop this solar, wind, and battery machine.
So what we're doing is we're setting up a beginning point of a journey.
Yes.
And we're going to explore all these different things over the period of time, correct?
Right. Build an argument that can then receive feedback from the community. So, and then we can build in updates with feedback and whatnot. But I think it's important to come up with new suggestions often and back them up with something that's similar or direct citation to where that idea came from. It's pretty remarkable what's happened now, and people won't really believe what's going on now in regards to solar, wind, and batteries. But we're starting to see a brand new business model where coal plants are being bought out, solar, wind, and batteries are being placed to replace that, and sometimes right on the property of the old coal plant. The financial engineering behind it is the solar, wind, and batteries can pay themselves off, and then the revenue after that can pay off
more,
a proportional value of the stranded assets from the coal plant. So this is starting to open up a possibility to where entrepreneurs can now come in and start to acquire these utility companies and grid companies, build solar, wind, and batteries, and use the proceeds from selling that electricity to pay off all the debt associated with all that infrastructure. And they can take it down if they want. They can salvage the entire grid and put it underground. Make it safer so it's not above ground. There's a whole bunch of things that we're talking about grid modernization, because customers now can receive money for producing more than they're using, which is good. I mean, that makes economic sense. But now in the future, we'll have to see what happens to the value of individually owned systems. So should they also be compensated with the marginal cost curve that every other? But I think with the ability to now shut down fossil fuel plants without losing any of that money, because you're acquiring them for pennies on the dollar and then making all of that money back with proceeds from solar and batteries after they paid themselves off. And then you've now accelerated the transition of fossil fuels and still profiting in the meantime. So still having a positive bottom line. So it's a business model.
So the shift is from scarcity mindset to abundant mindset. And whereas I don't have enough and I've got to sparse it out to you people, I have so much that I can give it away.
My man. And that's right. And then at a certain point, a person will resonate with something else and go into something. It's not going to be, this is the percentage of global GDP. That's not how we're going to find out. That'll be a piece of it. That's not, it's going to be much deeper. The argument here, meaning if we as people can gain the value of eating food without it affecting our budget and without us being effectively on social programs from the government, what does that mean? That means that we now eat as a right, not as a mode of survival or profit revenue motivation. So it completely shifts paradigm, and then it makes it so we create healthier things to eat because we're not focused on making more for less. We're focused on making it healthy for the individual. So we're starting to see a lot of these mechanisms out there that are starting to reward you for things that you're doing outside of the marketplace. So the proof is there. So now the design is unlimited, meaning there's an infinite amount of people that can design, or there's an infinite amount of ideas that can.
So how does the spirituality fit in?
So this is kind of a new way of thinking for me, but I think all of these technological advances that we're about to achieve, like connecting our brains to the cloud, telepathy, all these kinds of, fantasy things. I believe some of these things are inherent spiritual capabilities. So what does that mean? I think that we're receiving a lot of these innovations from beings that are spiritually advanced, that are drawing this information down from higher dimensions.
Spiritual, it would be more with less. Is a spiritual
Right.
to me. Spiritual is about my essence, my true authenticity. So I think the more I get in touch with that, the more I'll be in the flow of what we're talking about.
I'd say that that's fundamental to a lot of spiritual modalities out there, is to be able to master your own energy before having an effect on the energies around you. And then I would say with mastered energy and elevated frequency, you're not only changing yourself and the people around you, but I also have a belief that you can tap into extrasensory. So I have this firm belief that there are 360 senses in the human, in the complete aligned fullness of your gestalt. So all of it converged together: your mind, body, soul, energy, all of it. And that at a very heightened state, you can do all of these things that technology do today without the technology. Let me just cap it with one thing. I want to start the argument towards abundance with energy, and then build the abundant energy argument with the superpower term. So we'll get into superpower, and I'll draw a diagram of what it looks like. But we're technically talking about building over capacity, so that if every single industrial, commercial, and residential customer or hookup in your jurisdiction was at full power, it'd still be reaching into excessive power, because you'd have over capacity, which enables the abundance, and then you'd be able to measure it that way also. So you'd be able to specifically build out perpetual abundance, and it's a beautiful thing, because it's like the amount of innovation that's going to happen once power becomes abundant is I think it's gonna blow most of us away.
Well,
We're going to be using way more power in the future than we are now, with zero damage.